The words didn't just land, they detonated. They hung in the cold, polished air of the office like a slap nobody saw coming. My son, the same boy I once carried on my hip while running between double shifts. The same boy who used to cry into my apron because the world felt too heavy, now stood behind a glass desk worth more than the car I drove. Dylan leaned forward, knuckles pressed into the table, jaw tight with irritation he didn't even bother to hide. "Mom," he said, his voice low enough to make the room shrink around us, "you're a failure. Everything you touch stays small. I built this. Not you." Behind him, his assistant froze mid-step, unsure whether to look away or watch the spectacle. I felt the humiliation spread slowly across my chest like hot ash. I didn't respond, not because I had no words, but because I didn't trust my voice to carry them. Instead, I stared at him, at this man who carried my features, but none of my softness. His hair was styled like someone polished his head every morning. His suit was sharp. His expression was sharper. Without breaking eye contact, snapped his fingers at security like I was a troublesome customer who overstayed her welcome. "Please escort her out," he said. "She's disrupting operations." The two guards hesitated more than he expected. Maybe they saw the tremor in my hands. Maybe they understood something Dylan didn't. Mothers don't just show up to embarrass their sons. They show up because, deep down, they still believe their child is worth something. My handbag slipped off my shoulder and fell open. Sending papers, old contracts, bank printouts, receipts spilling across the shiny floor. Dylan scoffed. Vanessa, his business partner and girlfriend, appeared from the hallway with that polished, brittle smile she always used around me. "Lena," she said sweetly, "you really should keep your personal issues at home. This is a professional environment." She bent down and pushed the scattered papers together with the tip of her shoe, as if touching my belongings might stain her spotless image. In that moment, I saw her clearly, not as Dylan's partner, not as a powerful businesswoman, but as someone who had never stepped into a life where love and sacrifice lived side by side. I knelt on the floor to gather the papers, but my hands were trembling too hard to make neat stacks. That's when Dylan exhaled sharply through his nose and said, "Honestly, Mom, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Disorganized, emotional. You just don't get how the real world works." He might as well have stabbed me. I remembered the real world he was talking about, the one I carried on my back for years so he could someday stand tall in it. But now he towered over me like I was the reason he struggled, not the reason he succeeded. I picked up one document, the corner of a folder. I hadn't meant to expose, and I held it against my chest as I slowly stood up. Dylan rolled his eyes. "Please don't start crying," he muttered. "We have investors coming in 10 minutes. His tone was clipped, rehearsed. He'd said versions of this before. "Mom, don't embarrass me. Mom, don't show up without calling. Mom, this isn't your world." Over time, I became a stranger in the dream I helped him build. Finally, I met his gaze. My voice came out softer than I expected, but steadier than I felt. "If I'm such a failure, Dylan," I said quietly, "why is your business registration, your house deed, and your car titles all in my name?" The room froze. Vanessa's eyebrows shot up. Dylan barked a laugh, as if I had told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "You're confused," he scoffed. "You probably read something wrong again. We've talked about this. Everything's mine. You just helped me sign a few things years ago. You don't understand corporate paperwork." I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I finally understood something I should have realized long ago. He wasn't cruel because he grew. He was cruel because somewhere along the way, I shrank. I stepped back from the desk, clutching the folder to my chest. My voice didn't tremble now. "Dylan," I whispered, "I may not understand your world, but I never forgot how to read my own name." His smile faltered. Before the guards could touch me, before Vanessa could shape her mouth into another condescending apology, I turned toward the door. And in that moment, as the hallway swallowed me whole, I felt something unhook inside me. A thread I had pulled tight for 30 years, the belief that if I sacrificed enough, he would love me back, finally snapped. You want to know how I got here? How the boy I once fed, clothed, protected, and believed in turned into a man who called his own mother a failure. How the same woman he tried to humiliate ended up holding the keys to everything he thought he owned. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Lena, and before anyone ever called me a mother, life called me a fighter. I was 24 when I found myself holding a baby with fever in one hand and overdue bills in the other. My husband, God help me. I wasted years waiting for that man walked out when Dylan was 7. He said he was going to find himself. Hey, he found a new woman instead. I found a second job. That's how life works. Some people go searching for freedom. Others hold on to responsibility like it's the only thing keeping them afloat. I worked in a grocery store during the day, mopping floors and stocking shelves, and cleaned offices at night. My hands were always cracked from detergent. My back always tight with exhaustion. But Dylan, he was my reason to breathe. Every morning when I tucked him into his faded jacket and tied his ragged shoelaces, he'd hug me and say, "One day, Mom, I'll make you proud." I used to kiss the top of his head and whisper, "You already do." Back then, his love was simple, pure. He would slip drawings into my bag, pictures of us standing in front of a big house with a sign that said, "Our home." I kept every one of them in a tin box under my bed. There was a winter that still sits heavy in my memory. Dylan was 10. His backpack straps had frayed until they were hanging by threads. I told him I'd fix it, but I knew deep inside that fixing was no longer an option. It was breaking completely. He nodded, pretending it didn't bother him. But the next day, he came home quiet. When I pressed him, he finally whispered, "The kids laughed at me today." I waited until he fell asleep that night. Then I sat on the kitchen floor under a single bulb, counting coins and crumpled notes from a jar labeled emergency. That jar was meant to save us from eviction or a medical expense, not bullies. But when I held that worn-out backpack in my hands, I felt something rip inside me. I bought him a brand new one the next morning. Purple and black, sturdy, with pockets he didn't even need. The landlord sent me a late fee that month. I didn't care. His smile was worth it. People say motherhood is instinct. They don't talk about the sacrifice, the slow, constant bleeding of yourself for someone else's future. When Dylan turned 16, he got a part-time job at a local diner. He'd come home smelling like fries, complaining about rude customers. "I'll never work for anyone," he'd say dramatically. "I'm going to be my own boss." He used to laugh. "That's good, baby. Dream big." I didn't know then that one day he'd use those dreams as ammunition to belittle the life I built with blistered hands. Dylan was smart, charismatic, a natural leader. When he turned 20, he told me he had a business idea, something new, modern, bigger than our whole town. He wanted to open a trendy cafe and co-working hub for young entrepreneurs. It was bold, risky, and expensive. But he had the fire of someone who believed he could touch the sky. I recognized that fire. I once had it too, before life taught me to hold my dreams close and my disappointments closer. But Dylan, he wasn't afraid of failure. Maybe because I spent his entire childhood cushioning every fall. He started planning seriously market research. Menu ideas, branding colors. He talked to me for hours, pacing the kitchen as if he were pitching to an investor. At first, his excitement made me glow with pride. Then came the part that twisted everything. The money. Banks don't invest in young men with big dreams and empty pockets. They invest in people with collateral, property, assets, stability, all things I had scraped together over decades. The loan officer looked at Dylan and smiled politely, but her real attention was on me. "Mrs. Lena," she said gently, "if you co-sign and use your house as collateral, we can approve the loan." My throat tightened. My house wasn't big. It wasn't pretty. The paint peeled, the roof complained with every monsoon, and the plumbing rattled like old bones. But it was mine, my one piece of certainty in a life full of storms. I looked at Dylan. His eyes were shining with hope. With belief not in himself, but in me. "Mom," he whispered, "I swear I'll make this worth it." And like every mother who has sacrificed too much to suddenly stop, I nodded. I didn't think about risk. I didn't think about what would happen if he failed. I only thought about my boy, standing on the edge of his dream with no one else willing to hold a ladder. What I didn't notice that day, what I wish I had, is how the loan officer insisted the safest structure was to keep most things in my name. "Just temporarily," she repeated, "since you're guaranteeing everything." I signed without reading the fine print. Dylan signed without looking at me. If I had paused even for a second, I would have seen the future unfolding in quiet. Dangerous lines. I didn't know it then, but the pen I used to sign those papers didn't just help him build a business. It handed me the key to a truth that would one day shatter him completely. The truth that everything he claimed as his own was legally mine. The first year of the business felt like watching Dylan's dreams take their first breath. I worked early mornings at the cafe, wiping tables, counting cash drawers, brewing coffee when the barista called in sick. Dylan would burst through the door wearing hope on his face, talking fast about new ideas, expansion, marketing. In those moments, he was still my boy, the same child who used to run to me with scraped knees, asking if I could kiss the hurt away. He hugged me sometimes, grateful, proud. "Mom," he'd say, "we're doing it. We're actually doing it." And for a while, I believed we were partners, that this business was ours. But success has a strange way of peeling back the layers of someone's character. Some people grow humbler. Others grow hungrier. Dylan's hunger didn't scare me at first. He wanted more tables, more staff, more design upgrades. He wanted the cafe to look expensive, like it belonged in a city, not some old town. He said it with a laugh, but the way his eyes skimmed over me, that was new. Almost like I was part of the town he suddenly felt above. Everything started changing when Vanessa entered the picture. She walked into the cafe one afternoon like she owned light itself, perfect hair, perfect nails, perfect confidence. She introduced herself as a marketing consultant. Later I learned she had offered Dylan help in exchange for shares. She had a way of speaking that made everyone feel outdated, including me. She'd say things like, "We need a brand identity," or "let's modernize the customer experience." And Dylan, my Dylan, looked at her like she was the son he had waited for his whole life. I didn't dislike her at first, but I felt the shift immediately. My suggestions started disappearing into air. If I mentioned saving costs or reminded Dylan about overdue payments, Vanessa's expression would tighten, as if I had spoken out of turn. One afternoon, when I brought homemade pastries for the staff, she leaned close to Dylan and whispered, "This is sweet, but a little too, mom-ish for our brand." I pretended not to hear, but I felt the words bruise something deep inside me soon after. Dylan started introducing me to people differently. At the beginning, I was my partner, my co-founder, the woman who made all this possible. But as Vanessa's influence grew, I became my mom she helps around sometimes. Just like that. Years of sacrifice erased with a sentence. Sometimes I stood at the counter, wiping a spotless table, wondering when exactly I had stopped being essential and started being inconvenient. One night, Dylan came home from a networking event, smelling like someone else's world. He sat across from me in the kitchen and spread out business proposals. "Mom," he said, "we need to shift roles. Investors are asking about management structure. They think it looks unprofessional that family is involved everywhere." I swallowed. "Family?" I asked. "Or me?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Vanessa's voice was already speaking through him, her tone, her phrasing, her belief that appearances mattered more than loyalty. I accepted stepping back. I told myself it was part of growth. But the more I stepped back, the further he pushed me. He stopped asking for my opinion. He started making decisions without consulting me. And the worst part? He looked proud about it, like outgrowing me was a sign of success. He began avoiding coming to my house. "I'm busy," he'd say. "I'm meeting people." When he did visit, he'd look around like the place embarrassed him. Like the peeling wallpaper and old curtains were stains he couldn't wash off. I offered him food from recipes he grew up loving, but he hardly touched it. His eyes stayed glued to his phone, the same phone I once saved for months, to buy him because he said all his classmates had one. There was one night I will never forget. I attended a fancy dinner where Dylan was presenting the cafe to investors. I wasn't invited, but I went anyway, wanted to support him, even from afar. I stood at the edge of the hall and watched him speak with the confidence of a man who believed he belonged there. When he saw me, he froze for a moment. His smile faltered. I thought he would wave me over. Instead, he quickly recovered and introduced me as, "This is my mom. She used to help when we were small." Used to help. Past tense. I felt everyone's eyes glance over me, polite but dismissive. I left early that night. I didn't want him to see the tears that stung my eyes or the way my shoulders shook. Every mother believes her child will grow and fly. But no one warns you that sometimes when children learn to fly, they convince themselves they built their own wings. But even then, even in the rising storm of distance and disrespect, I didn't imagine how cruel he would become. I didn't imagine the day he would weaponize my sacrifices against me. The day he would tell me I had accomplished nothing. The day he would stand tall on a foundation I built and ask me why I wasn't standing beside him. I didn't know it then. But the cracks between us were widening. And soon, one line, one sentence would split our world open. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, one of those days when the air feels too still. As if the world is holding its breath. The cafe had been struggling for weeks. Not because of me, not because of any mistake I made, but because Dylan had taken on a series of unnecessary renovations that Vanessa insisted would elevate the brand. New marble counters, imported lights, designer chairs Adams that hungry customers couldn't taste. But Vanessa insisted they could feel. The expenses piled up like quiet threats. Bills went overdue. Cash flow shriveled. And eventually, the bank sent a notice requesting urgent clarification on repayment schedules. Dylan called me to his office. Un-OT. The cafe office, the new one. The one with the glass walls, automatic blinds, and a desk so large it could have hosted a small wedding. When I walked in, he didn't look up from his laptop. Vanessa sat on the couch with her legs crossed, flipping through a glossy magazine as if my presence bored her already. "Sit," Dylan said coldly. I sat. He tossed a stack of papers toward me. "Mom, did you file these on time?" I picked up the documents, confused. They weren't mine. They were paperwork for the renovation expenses Dylan had approved without ever asking me. "These aren't my forms," I said gently. "I don't handle these accounts." "Exactly," he snapped. "You don't handle anything important. You don't understand how this world works. You're stuck in the past. And now the bank is all over us." I stared at him, stunned. "Dylan, you never told me about these renovations." "I didn't even know." "Of course you didn't." Vanessa interrupted without looking up. "You're too emotional. You get overwhelmed. Dylan can't run a business if he has to explain every little thing to you." Her tone wasn't even cruel, it was dismissive. Casual, like she was talking about a child who needed supervision. But Dylan nodded in agreement. "Mom," he said, rubbing his temples, "you're slowing us down. Investors have complained that we look unprofessional. You walk around acting like you cone this place." I blinked slowly. "Dylan, I do cone it," he scoffed. "On paper, maybe. But you didn't build this?" "I did. I built every inch of it. They're just there." The words felt like a stone hitting the center of my chest. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "Baby, I sacrificed everything for you." The loans. The house. He slammed his hand on the table so hard. Vanessa finally looked up. "Stop acting like you did something special." His voice thundered across the room, sharp and unforgiving. "You were a cashier, Mom. You cleaned offices. You're not a businesswoman. You're not successful. You're not someone investors respect. You can't even understand half the policies we use here. He paused, breath heaving. Then he delivered the sentence that cracked the last piece of who I had been. "You're a failure, Mom," said it slowly, quietly, almost thoughtfully. Like a surgeon making the first precise cut. My ears rang. I couldn't breathe. The room dissolved around me until all I could see was the little boy I once willed into the world standing in front of me, slicing open every sacrifice I had stitched into his life. Vanessa smirked, legs crossing the other way, satisfied. "Dylan," she murmured, "just give her something small to do. She can manage simple tasks. She'll feel useful." Useful. As if I were a broken appliance they were deciding whether to throw away or keep for parts. I felt myself shrinking. But then something inside me, something I thought life had beaten out of me, sat up straight. I gathered my bag, stood slowly, and looked at my son. "My whole life," I said softly, "I thought love meant giving everything without keeping a piece for myself. I thought if I emptied my pockets and my soul for you, you'd understand what that meant. But you've taken my sacrifices and turned them into reasons to disrespect me." He rolled his eyes. "Mom, don't be dramatic. We need you to step aside. Permanently, Vanessa and I will take over everything from now on. Everything." I repeated, my voice lowering. "Yes, the business, the house, the assets, all of it. Legally, it's complicated, but you'll sign whatever we need you to sign." He said it with confidence. Too much confidence, as if he truly believed he owned the world he walked on, as if he had forgotten whose name the world was built under. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't tell him how much he was hurting me. Instead, I gathered the scattered papers he had thrown at me, placed them neatly into my bag, and looked at him one last time. "I hope," I whispered, "that one day you understand what real failure looks like. And it's not a woman who spent her life fighting for her child." For the first time, his expression cracked. He didn't know yet, but the empire, he believed, was his. The cars he drove, the house he flaunted, the business he bragged about, all of it was standing on ground he didn't legally own, and the earthquake was coming. The next morning, the sun rose with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. A strange calmness settled over me, not the calm of surrender, but the steady, grounded silence of someone who finally remembers who she is. I packed the documents Dylan had thrown at me, along with a folder I had kept hidden for years, the one I never imagined I'd need to use against my own son. But life has a way of revealing people when their masks fall off. At noon, Dylan called. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't apologize. His voice was chilly, businesslike. "Mom, be at the cafe by 2. We need you to sign some transfer forms." Vanessa and I already prepared everything. They had no idea what had been prepared for them. I walked into his glass-walled office precisely at 2. Vanessa sat beside him as if waiting to conduct a hostile takeover. They didn't offer me water. They didn't even offer a chai. I pulled one myself and sat down without asking. "Let's get this over with," Dylan said, sliding a stack of legal documents across the desk toward me. "These forms will officially give us full ownership of the business, the properties, and the car leases." I didn't touch them. Instead, I calmly placed my folder on the table. "Before I sign anything," I said, "I want you to read these." Dylan frowned. "Mom, this isn't the time." "It is exactly the time." I opened the folder and pulled out the first sheet. It wasn't an emotional letter. It wasn't a plea. It was a contract, a signed, sealed, irrevocable ownership agreement. Vanessa leaned forward. Dylan took the papers, skimmed the first paragraph, and the color drained from his face so fast it looked like someone unplugged his soul. "What? What is this?" He muttered. "Read," I said softly. He read and read and read, and with every line, his breathing grew faster, shallower, more frantic. Vanessa snatched the papers from him, her eyes scanning them like a woman trying to solve a puzzle seconds before it explodes. "This can't be right," she whispered. "Tell me this isn't real." "It's very real," I replied calmly. The folder contained the business license under my name, the property deed under my name, the cafe trademark registration under my name, the car leases co-signed with me as the primary owner, the bank documents showing he is listed only as an employee. Dylan's voice cracked. "Mom, Why? Why would you put everything in your name? I leaned back, finally allowing myself to breathe. Because when I started this cafe, you were 20. You had no credit history, no savings, no standing with the bank. The lenders only approved the business because I offered my house as collateral. They approved the property loan because my financial records were solid. I put everything under my name because it was the only way to protect the business until you grew into responsibility. I paused. But you never grew. The silence in the room was suffocating. Dylan looked like a boy again, not the proud, self-made man he pretended to be, but the frightened child who used to hold my hand on the way to school. Mom, I didn't know. You never told me. You never asked. I cut him off gently. The weight of that truth shattered something in him. Then came the second blow. I pulled out the last document, the one stamped and notarized that same morning, a revised ownership agreement. I've made a decision, I said quietly. A new one. Dylan's hands trembled. Mom, please, don't do anything crazy. Vanessa looked ready to scream. I slid the paper toward them. It says here, I continued calmly, that effective immediately. I am transferring 50% of the business to a new partner. Dylan gasped. Mother who? I held his gaze. A partner who values honesty and integrity. Someone who will help me rebuild what you tried to destroy. Someone who will treat me with dignity. His voice cracked into a plea. Not Vanessa. Please don't give it to Vanessa. I'm not giving it to Vanessa, I said. Then I spoke the name. Amelia. Dylan froze. Vanessa looked confused. Who? She scoffed. My neighbor, I replied. The woman who helped me when I was sick. The only person who brought me food. The only person who checked on me. The only person who didn't treat me like a burden. Vanessa's face twisted. You can't do that. She's an outsider. She's more family to me than you've ever been, I said. Dylan's voice broke completely. Mom, please don't do this. I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of it. I was stressed. I was angry. Please don't take my life away from me. This business is all I have. Stood up slowly. No, I said. This business is all I built. His knees almost buckled. I can change, he whispered, teary, desperate. I looked at him kindly, a kindness that came from closure, not hope. I hope you do, I said softly. I truly do. But your change is no longer my responsibility. I gave you everything, Dylan, everything. You chose to throw it away. Now I'm choosing myself. Vanessa stormed out first, slamming the door. Dylan collapsed into his chair, sobbing quietly, and I walked out of that office with my back straight, my heart steady and my dignity intact. For the first time in years, I felt powerful, not because I owned everything, but because I finally owned myself.